So let's talk about persistent volumes with Kubernetes and how that all works. We'll talk about the notion of what is a claim, what is a persistent volume, and then how a pod with a container running in it will access and use that persistent claim and that volume storage. So imagine that we want to expose some storage on a VM host, and the way we would do that is with the persistent volume. Notice the YAML file there, we have a kind of type persistent storage, and that's what really allows us to reserve storage on a disk. Now notice in this particular case it's accessing the temp data folder, which is going to have data on that VM. We're going to go over to our agents and actually create the data folder off temp, put a web page into that, and really illustrate what's going on here. Okay, so what we're going to have now is users or consumers of this persistent volume. In this case, we have a pod here. You can see, if you notice carefully, we do have an image here of Nginx running on this pod, and this particular container is accessing a persistent volume. Now, to make all that kind of work, we need to introduce another idiom here, and that would be a persistent claim against that storage. One of the things to notice here is that the container, that is Nginx, is accessing the volume that we've defined up above. Now the claim name, as you can see here, if you look carefully, you'll notice the claim name is task PV claim. Now what we need to do next is introduce a persistent volume claim. You'll see that over here. And what that is an effort to go ahead and access that volume and to request 3 gigabytes of storage from that volume. And so you notice there's a direct relationship between the persistent volume claim here and the actual volume here in the pod. So that's the connection of the three parts: the persistent volume claim, and then the pod, and then the persistent volume. So there'll be different pods that can access and request storage here from the persistent volume, and that's what a claim is doing. A claim is allowing my pod to access that shared storage here that's more global in nature. And in this particular case, you'll notice that we're trying to access as much as 3 gigabytes for this particular claim. So one of the first things we're going to end up doing is on each of the VM hosts, you can see here it says host path, we're going to go ahead and create a folder off temp called data. And into that folder we're going to place an index.html file. Now the reason we're doing all this is we want to illustrate how we can actually share physical storage on a VM host. So visually and conceptually we're going to have a VM host that has a pod on it. In that pod will be an Nginx container. That Nginx container has a default directory, user share Nginx HTML, and we're going to map that over to the persistent volume, and that's where we're going to find index HTML. So that really means that we're going to have Nginx serve up that web page index HTML. So think of that as a shared amount of storage that other pods can also use. In this case, we have just one Nginx that's using that, but there could be more. So first things first, we're going to go over to each agent and create a folder called /temp/data. Let's do that next. So let's talk about what it takes to be able to finally get to an agent node. We do have to go through a master node to get there, but to do all that we need to copy some private keys. If this is confusing to you, you can read about SSH forwarding and so on. So what we're going to do is copy from my current machine that I'm doing the development. This is the same machine that I did the actual deployment, so the SSH keys on the master and agent nodes are the same as the one that we're doing all these commands from. So it's a way for us to connect up the permissions and making it possible for us to SSH in. So as you can see here, here's the command. We're going to basically copy the SSH key, the private SSH key, over to my master node, and that's what this first command is about. After we do that, we can then SSH into the master node quite easily, and then from there we'll be able to SSH into the agent nodes. And once we get there, the ultimate goal, of course, is to create a directory on the agent nodes so we can learn a little bit about persistent. So what I'm going to do is go to my Bruno Deus Kubernetes resource group. That's the representation of my cluster, my Kubernetes cluster, previously shown. And I'm going to go here to the master VM. And if I click here on Kubernetes master, what we're interested in is the IP address or the DNS name, so we can actually remote in, copy to it, and so on. Remember, what we want to do ultimately is go through the master node, get to the agent nodes, and be able to remote in, so that we can create some folders, because that's how we're going to learn about the way Kubernetes persistent volumes work. Okay, so let's start with that first copy command over to the master node. That's done. Now let's go SSH into that master node, which is pretty straightforward. Now that that key is on the master node, it will make it possible for that master node to connect up to the agent nodes. But let's go ahead now and use the local copy of ID RSA, the private key, to basically SSH into the master node. So let's go ahead and do that command, and we're in there. And so now at this point, we're ready to SSH into the agent nodes. And to do that, we need the IP address or the name of that agent node. It's pretty easy to figure out the name of the agent nodes by using the kubectl utility, which is installed into the master nodes, of course. And so I'll say kubectl get nodes, and we'll see that we have two agent nodes here, 0 and 1. Let's go ahead now and SSH into each one of these and then create a temp data folder that we can start to play with. So let's go ahead and copy this to the clipboard, the first node, and then we'll SSH into it, and of course leveraging the local private key to make that hop. And so the way we do that, we basically have to type in the path of the locally copied the private SSH file, and that's in Azure user.ssh, and it's called ID RSA, as you saw earlier. And then we're going to say Azure user to get there at the name of that agent node. And so let's go ahead now and see if this gets us where we want. And you can see here that succeeded. We're now on the agent node, the first one. And then we'll do the same thing for the second one in a moment. So let's go ahead and clear the screen now for a moment and start creating the folders that we want on this agent node. So let's go ahead and do that for the second node. Notice I'll just go to agent node 1 instead of 0 here. Let's go ahead and get in, and we'll just create the folder as we did before. And so now we're ready to really continue learning about persistent volumes with respect to Kubernetes storage. And now we have the directories on the agent nodes we need to start doing some learnings.